In Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, we play as Australian Tomb Raider GF Chloe Fraser and are joined by perpetually irritated beefcake known as Nadine Ross. We're set out on a quest to retrieve the mythical Tusk of Ganesh before the psychotic yet handsome rebel leader known as Asav can get his hands on it. Sound fun to you? Wrong. Lost Legacy is the lowest reviewed Uncharted game from Naughty Dog, with critics primarily citing the recycled nature of a lot of the game's narrative beats and set-piece moments. Review outlets like IGN gave the game a considerably lower score than other Uncharted titles, claiming it felt quote-unquote by the numbers and had quote-unquote too much water. Oh wait, sorry, that's the wrong IGN review. I, however, think the game is just fine and dandy, and a lot of the critics missed out on what, in many ways, makes Lost Legacy a definitive Uncharted experience. Sure, Lost Legacy reuses a lot of ideas from previous titles, especially Uncharted 4, but its best-in-class audio-visual presentation, condensed yet poignant character story, and effectively layered gameplay mechanics make it not only a series highlight, but a damn good way to say goodbye. On the character and story front, Lost Legacy has a tough job. It has to A, follow up the superb narrative of Uncharted 4, and B, be awesome without Nate, Elena, and Sully's great ass.
You got a great ass, Sully.
Thanks.
To do this, Lost Legacy enlists one of Uncharted 2's best characters, the quote-unquote mostly professional Chloe Fraser. Chloe will intersect with Un-4 freshmen Nadine Ross and Samuel Drake, but this is mostly her story. Lost Legacy pulls inspo from A Thief's End and adds a little Freud to Fraser's Foxy. We get a deeper look at Chloe's motives, as well as a conclusion to her complicated hero arc. While Uncharted 4 takes its time in setting up and paying off its character moments, Lost Legacy tasks itself with telling a meaningful story in half the time as its mainline big brother. It does this by condensing some of A Thief's End's strongest narrative beats down into a little shot of beet juice and chugging it post-haste. Chloe Fraser was introduced to us in Uncharted 2 as a morally ambiguous summer fling for Nathan Drake. She was Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman to Elena's white bread picket fence type, and symbolized a beckoning away from Nathan Drake's usual heroics. In Lost Legacy, she is the hero, and since this is more Indiana Jones than Last of Us, Naughty Dog has to find a way to redeem her anti-hero antics in a satisfying and canonical way. The game wastes no time in setting this redemption up. It opens with Chloe haggling for scarves with a tiny Indian child. She expresses concern that the kid was left to run her father's Supreme pop-up clothing booth all alone, and the kid, in return for Chloe being so cool, tries to steal valuable items from her and then helps her sneak aboard a military truck, I guess. The exchange encapsulates a lot of what makes Lost Legacy's writing effective. It's brief, endearing, and will pay off in a big way later. After this, Chloe meets up with Nadine Ross during a rooftop brawl that sets up their dynamic. Chloe was late, went to the wrong spot, and Nadine had to come help her out. Nadine is like, I'm South African, easily annoyed, and punctual, and Chloe is like, I'm too hot and sarcastic to really get into an argument about anything. We also meet Asav, who does this with his hands to immediately establish that he's a psychopath, and then we're off to the Indian jungle to find shiny shit Chloe can sell on eBay. Like a nervous first-time talk therapy patient, Chloe and Nadine tentatively bring up their troubled relationships with their father and how they influence their career choice. Nadine inherited the now defunct Shoreline private military from her father, who did not leave his affairs in order prior to his demise. And Chloe reveals she's the daughter of an obsessive Indian archaeologist who tasked himself with finding the Hoysala Empire prior to his untimely death. The writers make it crystal clear that Chloe had a complicated relationship with her father, as her recollections are filled with both admiration for his ambition and frustration for his shoddy communication skills. This backstory will mirror Nadine's own relationship with Chloe, as Chloe discovers that lying to people about why you've dragged them deep into the Indian jungle to fight against rebel insurgents may, potentially, upset them. Nadine and Chloe share a somewhat tense, mostly friendly dynamic for the first half of our Hoysala adventure, until Nadine discovers Chloe isn't just here for the Tusk, but also Sam Drake, who was taken hostage by Asav while doing recon for Chloe. This turns into a midpoint fallout between our two protagonists, a la the Maroon chapter in A Thief's End, or the Trainwreck chapter in Uncharted 2, and is even replete with the immediate onset climate change and haggard movement that defines those scenes. Chloe and Nadine tentatively make up atop an adorable baby elephant. Chloe blames her dead father for her character flaws, and Nadine thinks the term selfish dickhead is funny enough to earn her forgiveness.
You're right. I am a selfish dickhead. It's good to hear you say it.
This peaceful resolution is short-lived because Nadine and Chloe rescue Sam, and let's just say Nadine and Sam aren't all too happy to be reunited.
Thanks for...
Professional courtesy.
So, are we good?
No.
Sam gets kind of fat-thored in this game. He was a complex and conniving driving force in Un4, and here he's just a silly goose who wears Hawaiian shirts and supports our leading ladies. On one hand, Nadine's constant bullying of Sam is hilarious. On the other, I find it frustrating that modern writers can't seem to make female-led action stories without turning all of the male characters into bumbling buffoons. Yeah, I know female side characters have been portrayed as unflattering stereotypes for years, but Naughty Dog has proven that they can write stories where all the characters are complex and intelligent, so Sam comes off as overly simplified in a way that feels a bit contrived here. But that's a political worm jar for another time. Sam, Chloe, and Nadine defeat a literal small army that used to be owned by Nadine for character development reasons and eventually procure what they came here for, the Tusk of Ganesh. All of Lost Legacy's little moments, the interacting with the girl in the market, and the big ones, Chloe forgiving her father and finding meaning in what the tusk symbolized, pay off here at the end. Chloe realizes Asab is sending a train with a bomb on it right through the city where she met the little girl, and decides to play the hero by stopping him once and for all. It's a pretty kick-ass scene that sees Sam, Chloe, and Nadine all teaming up for one last iconic Uncharted set piece, and I really appreciate the symbolic use of the train here. Chloe told Nate to stop playing the bloody hero on Uncharted 2's train. Now, in Lost Legacy, she's tired of walking away. Lost Legacy does almost exactly what Uncharted 4 does. It takes beloved popcorn characters, renders out their greatest flaw, and tells a story in which they have to overcome it. Both stories use side characters to help our hero recognize that flaw and find forgiveness when it flares up. For Nate, his obsessiveness and deceitfulness is mirrored in Sam. It damages his relationship with Elena, and with her forgiveness, he has to work to overcome it. For Chloe, her worst attributes are mirrored by her father: lying, lacking communication skills, and being an overall quote-unquote selfish dickhead. Her heroic virtues are brought out by the story of the Hoysala Empire, her admiration for her father, and like Nate and Elena in A Thief's End, Nadine's acceptance and forgiveness of her at her worst. It might sound like I'm agreeing with Lost Legacy's detractors, and I do, in so much as that it borrows a lot from Uncharted 4. What sets it apart, however, is its efficiency. The story isn't quite as deep or gratifying as A Thief's End, but it manages a commendable approximation in less than half the time. Lost Legacy is wrapping up several complex narrative threads by the time Sam and Nate even discover their lost city in Uncharted 4. U4 isn't bad because it's long, but Legacy's brisk pace looks impressive by comparison. In fact, it's actually roughly the length of the first Uncharted game. And when you consider how much more fleshed out the story is here in Hoysala than in the jungles of Drake's Fortune, Legacy's brevity looks all the more commendable. It's really a shame that this game's story is viewed as a retread when it could just as easily be viewed as the most efficient iteration of the series. It has the courteous runtime of Un1 and the layered character arcs of Un4, and I think that's worth more than a pat on the head from critics. Lost Legacy's story is a witty, effective, and brief summation of Uncharted as a series, and a worthy conclusion to Chloe as a character. Where Legacy really finds itself as a top-shelf Uncharted experience, however, is on the gameplay front. For the two people that have seen all of my content, you'll know I've had some gripes about Uncharted 4's gameplay systems. For everyone else who isn't binge-watching niche video game SAS YouTube videos, this is the TLDR. Uncharted 4 added snazzy new gameplay features like explorable open sections, dynamic stealth combat sandboxes, and a grappling hook. The game, however, does not really provide strong incentive for the player to use a lot of these tools. Madagascar's Jeep section might be gorgeous and yield a few collectibles, but feels inconsequential compared to TLOW 2's Seattle section, for example, in which the player stands to gain valuable resources and upgrade materials from exploring. The grappling hook is flashy and the stealth kills are fun, but they don't really provide meaningful advantages in combat scenarios that can be just as easily completed with guns. Uncharted 4's gameplay isn't bad by any stretch, but it does introduce a lot of mechanics that feel more optional where they could have felt more foundational. Lost Legacy, by layering several ideas Uncharted 4 kept separate on top of one another, completely negates this issue and lands as potentially the most engaging Uncharted game in terms of how it actually plays. Naughty Dog's most recent 3 releases have all dipped their toes into open world game design, but it's in Lost Legacy where we're provided the definitive Uncharted open world experience via its Western Ghats chapter. Just like Uncharted 4, you have your sexy mud physics based traversal, quippy getting to know you style dialogue, and maybe there's a treasure here, explorable ruins. Unlike Uncharted 4, you have an entire breadth of optional puzzles and combat scenarios that build up to a long-term, in-game reward called the Queen's Ruby. The Queen's Ruby allows the player to detect when they're around treasure, which is a really cool addition and makes finding all of the game's collectibles without a guide a lot more doable. The challenges you have to partake in order to unlock the Ruby are engaging and varied, and include shooting bells on a timer, solving weird horse puzzles, and defeating waves of enemies with big guns. This game provides great incentive for the player to explore, and essentially 2 different ways this chapter can play out for you. You can either run through the story content or engage in all of the optional areas and obtain the Queen's Ruby. This game borrows some open world fundamentals, including a watchtower that reveals locations of interest and gameplay that revolves around checking off symbols on a map. But A, its activities are varied, and B, you have to pause what you're doing to actually look at the map, so it feels a lot more engaging and surprising than your average Ubisoft slog. Most importantly though, it adds so much more depth to the ideas that Uncharted 4 brought to the table with its Jeep section. This is really what an open world Uncharted game should feel like. It guides you enough to not bore you, but leaves enough up to the imagination so you're actually surprised when you come across new content. In that way, Western Ghats is right up there with Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild in terms of being an engaging open world. I actually think it's a shame that this might be Naughty Dog's last game in the series, because this chapter heavily alludes to a much more ambitious Uncharted experience. It feels like they were really onto something here, and it's too bad we probably won't get to see that come to a head. Either way, Western Ghats doesn't reuse Uncharted 4's open world ideas, but rather uses them as a jumping off point. It's one of my favorite sequences in any Uncharted and certainly does more than retread. Jumping from open worlds to open-ended combat sandboxes, I came to the following conclusion upon my revisit to the Legacy of Thieves collection on PS5. One of the most frustrating aspects of Uncharted 4's gameplay for me was actually right at the end. After hours and hours of using jumping, climbing, mudslides, rope swings, and pitons to get around, the game finally starts chaining these things together in an engaging way, but only for about 10 minutes before we hit the final boss and the credits roll. Lost Legacy takes that last-minute glimpse of gameplay and runs with it. A lot of this game's more impressive set pieces and combat scenarios are built around synthesizing multiple game mechanics together, and the net result is a much stronger combat sandbox than what we've seen in any other Uncharted game. A favorite example of mine is fighting the APC in the rain after Nadine punches us in the face. This section takes what had been a set piece in Uncharted 4 and turns it into something of a mini-boss. The player has to sneak around, collecting RPGs and C4 to be able to break through the APC's armor. If spotted, the APC, along with several heavily armored enemy NPCs, will open fire on the player. Remember earlier how I said Uncharted 4 doesn't really provide strong incentive to use its combat mechanics, especially stealth? Well, problem solved. By introducing the APC and the need to collect stronger weapons from around the map, this game provides a very strong incentive to use its stealth, enemy marking, and lockpicking mechanics effectively. All this goes ditto for the helicopter fight, where you also have to collect RPGs from locked crates while avoiding enemy NPCs. What makes these fights fun is you don't actually have to use stealth, it's just harder if you don't. The game presents you with a bunch of mechanics and rewards you if you understand how to chain them all together. It's a relatively simple concept, but it really takes Lost Legacy's gameplay up a notch. Maybe these systems did something for me that they didn't do for others, but when I'm climbing up a mid-air helicopter I had to personally take out using lockpicks, stealth, and rocket launchers, I'm left scratching my head at the quote-unquote by-the-numbers allegations. Other games in the series have kick-ass set pieces, and Uncharted 2 even has a couple helicopter mini-bosses itself, but no other Uncharted title mixes its combat and set pieces quite like Lost Legacy. Speaking of combining set pieces, this has all been very high praise prior to even mentioning the game's ending, which is, in many ways, the crown jewel of its 1 + 1 = 3 approach to game design. Lost Legacy takes the Jeep chase sequence from 4's midpoint and synthesizes it with 2's iconic train scene. On paper, these are 2 things you've seen before. On the stick, it's the most engaging iteration of the 2. You, as the player character, have to jump between the train and a commandeered jeep several times throughout the chapter. I'm not even going to pretend to understand what's going on under the hood here, but the net result is the Uncharted set piece where I felt the most in control. This whole thing is scripted, obviously, but it had this crazy sense of momentum and dynamism that's really something to behold. The sequence concludes with a proper Assav fistfight, and once again, I felt this played as more of a strong iteration than a bland retread. You actually have to dodge Asav's attacks to progress throughout the fight, unlike the scene in Uncharted 4 where Nate and Sam fight Nadine. There's even a part where you have to dodge railroad infrastructure while dangling off the side of the train, and that's the kind of stuff Lost Legacy does to heighten the player engagement over previous Uncharted titles, which have historically struggled with implementing fun melee combat. Overall, it's easy to see how one could look at an abstraction of what Lost Legacy has to offer and write it off as inessential. When actually playing the game, however, it becomes clear that the game offers both iteration and expansion of what came before. Its systems are more layered and its set pieces are stimulating to play through. Before I get out of here, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least briefly mention the audio-visual presentation of this game. I replayed this game on PS5 through the Legacy of Thieves collection. I used the 3D audio option with Sony's Pulse 3D headphones and an LG C1 TV on the game's performance setting. I was absolutely blown away by both the graphics and the sound the entire time. Seriously, my jaw was on the floor for 8 hours straight. Not sexual. I feel like in the 15 months between Uncharted 4 and this game, Naughty Dog made some improvements to their engine, because I feel like this game honestly looks a little bit better than Thief's End. Uncharted 4 had this soft, watercolor look to it, and Lost Legacy looks super sharp in comparison. This game's beauty can definitely be admired without any putdowns to U4, however, because for the most part, they're very similar. Henry Jackman, who did A Thief's End, returns to score this and once again came with an absolute masterclass in game soundtracks. What I love about Henry's score here is that both the action scenes and the slower, more emotional scenes feel musically memorable, just like in 4. They only add and never detract, and the game just wouldn't be the same without his incredible contributions. On the whole, I think it's really too bad that this game is frequently dismissed as some kind of by-the-numbers DLC. To reduce this game down to a simple retread is to miss out on all of its smart story consolidations and, more importantly, necessary gameplay expansions to Uncharted 4's strong foundation. It may not be Naughty Dog's most ambitious title ever, but there's something to be said about its lighter tone and shorter runtime. It recaptures a lot of the simplicity that made the original Uncharted trilogy what it was, while mixing in some of Uncharted 4's character depth and more layered storytelling. Uncharted: The Lost Legacy is one of my favorite outings with this game series, and more than a worthy tip of the hat to this beloved franchise. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.